came upon the back room. It was something very strange, and something went out of it very quickly. Caught a glimpse of this thing disappearing in the woodline. It was just like a shadow. My name is Dennis Carroll, and I've been involved in paranormal investigative research and all different aspects and fields of the paranormal for, I guess, 55 plus years now. I'm a retired law enforcement. I'm a minister. I'm a doctor of metaphysics, parapsychologist, a cryptid researcher. I like all avenues of the paranormal. I like everything connected with it. That includes UFO research, Earth anomalies, Earth mysteries, folklore. I'm involved in all of that. I'm also an author, and I've written several books on the paranormal.
Well, in your years of research, what have been some of the more interesting things you've discovered?
Well, I've had some interesting. I'll talk a little bit about cryptozoology. I've had some interesting experiences in the field of cryptozoology. Um, I have actually seen Bigfoot. I had an encounter with Bigfoot several years back, and it was very interesting. Up until that time, I had researched. I had probably poured over thousands and thousands of case histories and sightings and all that. I was very interested in it, but it's a completely different ball game when you actually encounter it yourself. When you see it, it's like that old saying, "Seeing is believing." Truly is. And you turn a different corner when you actually see it. And what happened? This happened during the night, and I had two other guys with me. I don't like to take a big group in the field. I like it to be very small and compact. Really, I like to do it by myself, which is not a good idea to do unless you got some backup and all that. I don't suggest people do that. But you have to get a feel of the lay of the land and kind of become part of the environment to assess what's truly going on. And I approach all types of investigation uh, in sort of my law enforcement experience. I kind of look upon it as like a crime scene. When you come upon a crime scene, you say, okay, talk to me, tell me what the story is, or what's going on here. And you can approach many different avenues of paranormal research that way. But I had two guys with me that night. There were three of us, and I had been reading about how they flush tigers out during tiger hunts in India. I said, well, let's try their method a little bit. So we had heard a tree knock or two that night, and so we knew we were in probably a very active area because I had actually found prints in that same area that were like 18 inches long, and they were very dramatic kind of prints. But unfortunately, they were in ground that I could not cast them. But anyway, I did cast them, but they didn't come out that good. But anyway, I that night, and it was very dark that night. There was no moon, just starlight, and we were very heavy forest, very heavily foliage in the forest. So it was very dark. A lot of people don't really know how dark it can be when you're out way in the middle of nowhere. Definitely with no light source with your own. So I had sent one fellow to my right and the other guy to my left, and I sent them in the left and right fields out. And I told them to go a good ways down in the forest before they met. They would convict and meet down in the forest. And that was the plan was that it might push whatever was out there up towards my position. I was in the middle. So I kind of hunkered down and had a stakeout, waiting for something to happen. Well, sure enough, I had a night vision scope. Okay. And like I said, it's very dark. And sure enough, I got some activity. I could really sense movement in the brush and all that before I actually saw anything. But here's the thing about it. I was kind of, I don't know if you've ever used anybody out there's ever used night vision scopes. They can hurt your eyes after a while. You know, it can kind of get you because of the way the light is, the infrared light or whatever. And I kind of was just resting, kind of put the scope down for just a moment, rest my eyes. And about the time I felt this movement, I pulled my scope back up, and I caught this movement next to probably it was maybe I would say no more than 7 or 8 yards away from me. There was a huge big oak tree, and I saw Bigfoot go behind this tree. I saw just the side of him. I saw the arm, the leg, and the side of his face. And he brushed a 6 foot sapling when he went to go in behind this big oak tree. And it was just like something out of a movie, you know, the way it took place. And I could see this in the scope. I could even see that he was sort of, I'm not going to say cinnamon color, but sort of a kind of a dark brown like color. And he had actually had long hair hanging off of one arm. I could see that very well. I could see sort of the side of him, but not the whole Bigfoot. But as he went in behind this tree, I immediately jumped up. And like I said, there was no wind, there was nothing moving. I went immediately to the oak tree, and I looked in behind it, no Bigfoot. I looked down through the forest, no movement at all. I looked up the tree, I looked down below. Was there a hole here? It was very almost to me like supernatural in the way this thing completely disappeared in front of me like that. It was very strange.
That has been described by many, and I'm sure you're very aware of that, that they'll be there and then suddenly they're not there, and there's no sense of where perhaps they have disappeared to. Was that your only encounter, your only sighting?
Yeah, well, here's the thing, you know, a lot of, and I've read, like I said, I've done a lot of research on these cryptozoology wise, and I think the jury's still out on whether this is actually an actual animal, or does it have some type of a supernatural ability or some type of a camouflaging ability. There was no way humanly possible in that incident that anything could have gotten away from me without me seeing it. And I've seen every kind of wildlife in the forest. They make a movement. Everything on this planet leaves a track. You just got to find it. And there were no tracks. There was nothing. It was just there and then gone the next moment. To me, that was very startling. I had never really anticipated like that if I'd ever run up on Bigfoot of anything like that happening. But since then, I've done a lot more research in the area of the fact that is it like going through portals? Is it, moving through time from one reality to another, or what's going on with that? I think a lot more research needs to be done in areas of this to find out exactly what this being, this entity, or this thing can do. It's very interesting.
Well, it is. It's a fascinating subject, and some people see them as just plain animals. When they have a sighting, they have no paranormal activity around them. It's just them and the creature in the woods. But
Mhm.
for other people, they tend to turn into orbs, balls of light. They disappear and appear, and seem to have some unusual characteristics about them. Have you ever seen the orbs associated with the subject?
I've had some very interesting other experiences since kind of that kind of lit a fire under me when I actually saw Bigfoot to get deeper into it. But I've heard many things about it. Like he's able to look like a stump when he wants to, or he can. Some people say he could be actually a shapeshifter type being that can actually shift. And premier talent for anything like that would definitely be being able to shapeshift. I would love to be able to do that. That would be sort of a superpower, wouldn't it? But all these years I have trained myself to study animal tracks in the forest, and we have to be very careful. This is one one big area of cryptozoology research. You have to know what you're tracking, what you're seeing, what tracks you're finding, what kind of an animal this is. And like a four-legged animal leaves a different kind of a track, and it can often step in its own track, which can throw you off. So, and then they make different tracks when they're running or standing still or moving. So you have to study all these kind of tracking techniques to understand what it is you're seeing out there in the woods, what you're going after. But what really, disturbs me is something that can actually move like that and not leave a track. That's very telltale kind of a thing. What is going on here? And I'll tell you this, I have studied a lot of the supernatural aspects of this world, being interested in metaphysics and stuff, and how they relate to the physical attributes of this world. And it seems to me, this is just my hypothesis, that this thing called Bigfoot, along with other cryptids like Dogman, et cetera, may be like one foot in our reality and one foot in their own reality, and they could go from one to the other when possible. That's a possibility we need to look at, definitely.
Well, like a lot of other things, there are some instances where one person standing beside another, one person sees something paranormal, the other one does not. And have you run
Mhm.
into that where you have like dual perception going on here? They're not really seeing the same thing.
Mm, that's true in the cryptid community. There's still a lot of contention about that. But what strikes me as very strange when something begins to exhibit signs of supernatural, paranormal type behavior like that. You have to really take a closer look at it and see what is really going on. There is natural camouflage in nature. We've seen that. We know we're familiar with that. We have developed our own camouflage techniques, which are very good. I've seen some very, very interesting ones. We can almost become invisible in certain aspects. That's some top military secret stuff going on in that research right now. But I think we need to examine these things more closer. And I think there's a lot of animosity in the cryptid world today going on. People when they become opinionated about these things, and it's good to have an opinion, but you need to listen to other opinions as well. You don't get the whole picture. It's better to assimilate things that way. I had a very interesting encounter. I'll relate that to you. There is a cryptid out there that I call Cryptid X. And the reason I call it that because I don't know exactly what this thing is. Okay, I can't put it in any one classification or another. But I had a very interesting incident many years ago where I was out hunting, actually deer hunting with my brother, and we had split up. He had gone further on down in the valley there that we were in. And I went towards an old farmhouse that was sitting in a field, was the edge of a field, and it's very close to the wood line there. And well, being me, being curious as I am, I said, well, I'm gonna go in this old house and look around. It was a big old type farmhouse, and it was one level, not two levels. And I think the doors and the windows were all out of it. It had probably at one time or another been used to store hay or farms or whatever, but by now this was empty. Well, I thought it was empty. As I went in and was looking around a little bit, and this was in daylight now. It's middle of the day. Um, I came upon the back room. There was something very strange about this. It was filled with brush. It was like, big long branches that had been broken off of a tree or whatever. This whole room was filled with this brush, like a big pile of brush. I could see the side window a little bit over this brush. And about the time I walked in this room, this struck me as looking like some type of a den or a nest or something, the way this thing was constructed inside this room. Um, I happened to see over, and I heard it too, over this pile of brush, the back window, which was completely open, something went out of it. very quickly. I heard it. Well, I immediately turned and went out of the house as quick as I could. Caught a glimpse of this thing disappearing in the woodline. It was just like a shadow. I cannot tell you to this day what kind of a shape it had, what kind of a silhouette, which, just like I said, it was like a dark shadow. And it went into the woodline. Well, I looked down and I could see prints, a line of prints, because, like I said, this was in the field, at the edge of the field. And they were very strange looking prints. They were big, very big, and they looked kind of like the prints that a wolf would make, definitely, or a large dog. But they had a difference to them. They didn't look like that. I mean, they kind of resembled that, but yet they didn't look like that. And here's the weird thing. I went on into the wood line after this thing as far as I could go in and I couldn't see it. There was nothing, no sound, no noise, no track, no more tracks. I went back. I said, I'm going to take another look at these tracks. So I go back and to exactly where that line, and the tracks are gone. I look everywhere. There are no tracks. There was no wind. There was no rain. There was no one behind me racing the tracks. What happened to those tracks to this day? And that struck me as strange. And the fact that I said, was this some type of a supernatural thing? Was this a dog man? Was this that Cryptid X, which I have seen other clues to this Cryptid X out there that don't go in with Dogman, that don't go also in with Bigfoot or other known cryptids or supposedly known cryptids out there. So I have to wonder what this thing is, because it kind of throws me off. All these years, I've been able to track other animals and all that, but to have your tracks disappear like that, that's very strange.
I just did an interview with someone about the LBL massacre, and the tracks they found there were very odd, very, very strange, almost human-like with claws on the end of them. Is that how you would describe this to some degree?
Well, I've seen other signs as well of this thing. I mean, I've actually seen claw marks in trees where no bear could reach, and well, we know that bears can climb a tree when they want to, definitely. But usually they don't climb a tree and claw it up the way this was. I mean, this was like whole big patches of bark off. They were like very deep intonations, and there were more claw marks than what are the claws of a bear. This was not like what a panther would do, and I've seen what they can do, or a mountain lion. This was something different. I mean, it had a different feel to it. I have seen other things that I attribute to this, what I call the Cryptid X, that don't line up with other things, even in the natural aspect of animals. Um, it's very strange. Also, I don't know if I can connect this Cryptid X with the so-called Glimmer Man that people claim to see. And I actually had a run-in with a Glimmer Man kind of a thing where I actually saw, and this was like I say again on a windless day. There was no breeze at all, and very high up in an oak tree, I saw the leaves part, the branches part, as if someone were there. Actually, you would do take your hands and part the branches and look out. And I saw this happen, and right in that very same spot there was like a weird glimmer, shimmer, like I'll say. It was kind of like a shimmer. Was this some type of portal activity? Was this some type of being? Could this be the Cryptid X that I have run across? It's very interesting. A lot of questions.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before, but sometimes when people describe a portal, they do describe it as having kind of a shine or a shimmer or some type of unusual gleam to it. So that could possibly be true. So in your other research, what all have you discovered?
Mhm. Well, I have actually ran into, I think, portal activity. And the interesting thing about the portal thing is its ability to kind of bend and shift time and realities in itself. But you will have different attributes that happen. I never investigate out in the woods without a compass, and I've actually had my compass go haywire for no reason. Usually it can be around strong electrical fields or electromagnetic fields that this happens. And you'll be way out in the woods, you're not around any power lines or power towers or all that kind of stuff. When you have something like that happen, there's got to be a reason for it. And that I think is one of the telltale signs that you may be getting close to or encountering some type of portal vortex activity of some kind. And this so-called Glimmer Man, which a lot of people equate it to the movie Predator, when he could cloak himself, And is this some type of cloaking going on? You have to wonder, or is there some kind of movement coming out of a portal in that respect? But the portal I encountered, I'll tell you real quick what happened, and I don't think I actually passed through the portal in that respect, but I think I got very close to the proximity of it. But I went down a small, was a very long path in the woods, and I knew this path very well, like the back of my hand. It didn't have that many twists, didn't have any off branches to it. It was a straight path. I went down this path that day, and about halfway down, I began to notice I had a weird feeling. It just kind of a physical feeling that overtook me. And when you've been investigating, and I've been doing this for like 55 plus years now, you kind of get a second nature. When you feel something like that, you kind of become very sensitive to these things, and you pay attention to it. I do very quickly, and I began to feel. I'm not going to say a sickness, but kind of queasy like feeling. And there was like a hum or like a slight buzz in the air that shouldn't have been there. And here's the interesting thing: everything just went silent, just quiet. The birds, everything for just a few minutes, and I became like almost disoriented in that respect. And all of a sudden, everything that I was looking at did not seem familiar. The path was not familiar anymore. Well, I knew then something really flaky was going on. So I kind of just turned around. I said, I'm going back. This is weird. I'm going back. So I turn and I go back. And the further I get away from this point, everything comes back to normal. The birds start singing. I feel better. I don't have that weird buzzing feeling going on. I mean, I couldn't tell you if it was actually in the air or in my ears that I heard or felt this, but it was very strange. And since then, I've done a lot of research on portal activity, and people describe these very same things happening supposedly around portal activity. And also, they talk about strange mists and fogs and stuff like that appearing around these as well. It's a very interesting attribute, and especially if you're out in the forest and places like that, it's a good idea to watch for something or be aware of your surroundings. Definitely.
Well, absolutely. There's a lot of evidence out there, I think, that just goes by us because we're not aware, whether it be, Bigfoot activity, signs of some kind of a cryptid. Most people just aren't looking for the evidence that might be right in front of them. So what else have you researched?
Well, when you now the research part of a lot of this, and I like to look at research in two aspects: this physical research and sort of scholarly research. The scholarly research, of course, is what you do basically when you go over case history, sightings, do deep internet research on things like this. But then you have physical research. And I'll say this every time I go out in the woods, every time I go out on a hunt or anything like that, I always learn something new. It will teach you something. That's what's so interesting about the fields of the paranormal and all this. It is there are no true experts in these fields. I've said that for many years. It's very true. There are no true experts, but it is an ongoing field of learning. It teaches you something all the time. If you're not receptive to that, then you're really cutting yourself off. You're really disadvantaging yourself to a great degree if you don't do that. So it's an ongoing learning experience every time you do that. So I think the research part, you can't have research without investigation and vice versa. They go together and they complement each other and back each other up. I call it a marriage. Definitely, they're married in that respect. Um, but the more you learn about these things, the more you experience them, the more you hear about other people's experiences, what they have found out, the more you get a better view, the bigger picture, I call it, of what may be going on in there. But we don't have a lot of people in the cryptid community doing that today. We need to do more of that instead of having our own opinions and sticking with that. We need to be more open minded and listen more to what other researchers are saying and experiencing.
In the paranormal field, what would you say has been your expertise, the part that you've really delved into?
Well, I would say, you got to do the hands on. You got to go out there and you got to do as we say in law enforcement, you got to do the steps. And that's when I first got into this stuff, that's who I went to. That's before I got into law enforcement. I went to law enforcement because they're the experts at investigating. And that's why I say, actually, I wrote a book about this. It's called Beyond the Shadows, a field guide to the paranormal that tells you how to take an investigation, how to do it properly, and along with scientific criteria. And a lot of people, unfortunately, in this field are throwing scientific criteria out the window. All right, you can't really do that because that's one of the best ways to investigate, to assimilate information, is to do it in a more scientific slant with it. Now, I'm not saying completely put the scientific blinders on and see only what you want to see. You've got to be open. You've got to keep your mind open to the possibilities that surround you. I have a saying, I believe in the possibility of the impossible because I believe in the possibility of possibilities. There are many possibilities out there, and you've got to examine them all, or try to, as much as humanly possible.
Give me an example of something that you've actually, done out in the field that you could say that you discovered some evidence.
Okay, well, one thing that comes to mind is an actual hands-on thing that I did, where actually it was related to that Bigfoot thing I talked about earlier. I went back to that same forest and was looking around to see if I could find more evidence and all that of what I had saw that night. It's a different story in daylight. And I definitely went back to try to find out where this Bigfoot went to. I looked up the tree, the ground, I checked for pits, I checked for caves. And and I found this to be very interesting to me. A lot of Bigfoot sightings have taken place near caves or cave or tunnel systems. If I were going to hide, that would be the definite place I would go to hide. Would definitely be a tunnel underground. And we do, and the largest part of this planet that we're on is definitely underground. Uh, and we don't know what's down there. There could be anything down there. But one more thing that I found interesting that was connected with several Bigfoot cases that investigations I've done, is government interference. I've actually had helicopters show up. I've actually had drone activity, black unmarked vehicles show up. Why is the government so interested in this? I think without a doubt they know that cryptids exist. And I think they may be either trying, or maybe at the root of some of these cryptids, or maybe trying to utilize them for certain means. We know that certain people in the areas in the government are very good at utilizing things, weaponizing stuff, you might say. And I have to wonder if some of that's going on too. So I found a lot of interesting evidence on that as well.
What do you think about the Native American take on Bigfoot, cryptids, that sort of thing? Where have you studied that at all?
Well, I've studied that a lot. Being interested in folklore, which is one of my big fields I love. I looked at what the Native Americans have to say. They consider Bigfoot, many of the tribes do, to be a separate people. They have always venerated them as being like another tribe in that respect. We know that the Native Americans had wars between their each tribes and different tribes. Some of them didn't get along, some did. Some cooperated, just like people in all over the world. Um, when they talked about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, is the one name I like to use. Um, when they talk about Sasquatch, they venerate them as sort of like another people, another tribe that's out there. You don't bother them. You acknowledge them. You don't bother them. You leave them alone. You kind of live at an uneasy peace with them in sort of ways. A lot of the tribes took it that way, but some other ones were fearful of that. They warned their women. You know, there were like instances where women were kidnapped supposedly by Sasquatch and taken off for whatever purpose, breeding or whatever. They would never let their women out alone in the woods, even to go get water or whatever. They always either a brave or other women with them. They were sort of fearful of that. It was like another caution out in the woods, like, well, you watch out for mountain lions, you kind of watch out for Sasquatch as well. Um, he was acknowledged and kind of respected because the Native Americans placed a great deal in the ability to respect something, like they respected nature, and he was considered part of nature, along with some of the Dogman things too, is in that same respect. Although I think they were a lot more fearful in some aspects of Dogman than they were of Sasquatch.
Why do you think the Dogman legends and discussions about Dogman are so much more frightening than, often the Bigfoot? It seems to be a lot of intimidation from Bigfoot whenever he encounters someone, but the Dogman seems like they could be a little bit more violent. Why do you think that is?
I don't. I think. Well, I think people, for one thing, we're more accustomed to Sasquatch, Bigfoot, than we are to Dogman. He seemed, and here's my spin on Dogman, and I have actually never seen Dogman, unless it was that day that I talked about that I actually did and didn't know it. But the interesting thing about Dogman, he appears to me, and some other people have stated this as well, as more otherworldly than Sasquatch. It seems to me like, to me, just my own personal feeling, that Sasquatch really belongs here. You know, Bigfoot belongs here more so than Dogman. He seems to be something to me that's transcending our reality. I don't know. He just does. He has an otherworldly feeling about him. And when people talk more about him, even the Native Americans, there was more of a fearful thing to him. Oh, you just don't mess with this. Here's what I've said a lot of times, and I do a lot of lectures on this stuff. If you run into Sasquatch, which I did one day, I finally did. He may cut you a break, and leave you alone. He may do that. A lot of times, supposedly, Dogman does not do that. He will not let you walk away. He can be more of a danger, I think, in some ways than Sasquatch. But you got to take it to the situation that you're meeting them in, or you might be mixing them up with here. You got to take it in that respect too. But I've talked a lot about, and a lot of people get this confused with the werewolf. Now, the werewolf, according to the folklore and all that, is a completely different thing. The dog man. Although I have to wonder sometimes if some people who see Dogman might not possibly be seeing a werewolf, and vice versa. But here's the interesting thing about that. A werewolf is completely, I don't even consider it a cryptid, okay? It is a supernatural creature. It is brought about by dark magic or witchcraft or whatever name you want to put on it. It's not supposed to be that way. But here's the interesting thing between Dogman and the werewolf. The werewolf changes. Dogman is Dogman 24/7. But the werewolf might be your neighbor or your Sunday school teacher until he turns into a werewolf. That might be the case, whether he's either doing it by magic or cursed, as the folklore goes in that. To me, you got to be careful what you're looking at and what you designate as a true cryptid. Because there are different aspects to this. And we've been shaded, unfortunately, and this is what we've got to guard against. We've been shaded in our mind and our opinions and our outlook by Hollywood and a lot of folklore too. But Hollywood got a lot of the folklore wrong. And it kind of messes us up in that respect. So we've got to really, like I said earlier, we've got to guard our opinion well and how we look at the big picture and not let other things shade us. I've often told this that I've mentored a lot of paranormal groups over the years that includes spiritual research. I don't like to call it ghost hunting. I call it spiritual research. Um, Ghost hunting's been done to death. But I've mentored a lot of groups, and I say, look, when you go into something, whatever the case is, don't go in with an opinion, thinking, oh, it's this or it's that. Let Find out what the true picture is, and I think you got to take cryptozoology the same way.
Of course. Have you ever seen a ghost? Have you ever had an encounter with a ghost?
Oh, I've seen several full-bodied apparitions, which are the holy grail of spiritual research. I remember very well one night I was in a house, and this lady had reported some paranormal, the standard paranormal activity, shadows, doors closing, things like that. And I was setting a camera. There's a long hallway in here, and there were like rooms on each side of the hallway, of course. And I was setting up a camera, trying, as a night vision camera. And I also was putting up a laser blanket down this hallway, and that helps you pick up shadow movement. And I was looking straight down this hallway, and unfortunately, it's the way the paranormal does you. I've had people say, why couldn't you get it on camera? Why couldn't you get this? But it never performs for you when you want it to. I've told somebody not long ago if I could get the paranormal to perform for me when I wanted it to, I'd be a very rich person, probably. But it doesn't work that way. It always seems to pop up when you're least expecting it. And that's the way it goes. But I was looking down this hallway, setting the blanket up, and down at the very end of the hallway, I saw this elderly lady cross from one room across the hall to the next room. And I said, "Well, who is that?" And I mean, I saw her very plainly. I mean, she looked perfectly normal. I could tell you what this type of house. She had a house coat on, had long white hair. I mean, I saw her very well. It was just not a figment of the imagination. It wasn't a shadow. It was a full-bodied apparition. I didn't know it at the time. I mean, it looked so real. I thought it was someone in the house. So I went back to the lady. I immediately walked to the kitchen where the lady that owned the house was. She was the only one besides me and her in the house at that time. The other person that was with me was outside at the time getting more equipment or something. So I go to the lady and I said, "Oh, is there someone else in this house?" And she said, "No, I'm just you and me and the other guy outside." I said, "Well, I just saw a lady," and I described to her. I said, "I saw a lady across the hall," and which unfortunately I didn't get on camera. Um, I told her what she looked like, and she said, "Oh my God, that's my mother. She passed away in that room."
Wow. Well, that sounds like a very interesting moment. Had anyone else ever seen her in that house before?
No, she said that no one else had seen. She had a feeling, and I talked to her later on. I told her about it. And I said, "If that's your mother, that's where she passed away and all that. Have you ever seen her?" And she said, "Oh no, but I have felt her." Said, I even smelled her perfume that my mother used to wear." Said, "I felt her presence very strong," and said, "This backs it up that I feel like she was there." So the lady who was kind of disturbed by this is my mother's still here. And you got to look at the human equation in this. And I've always, when I investigate and go into this type of things, I always leave it open to the fact that there's some way to help someone. That's what it's all about. It's not just about investigation. It's not just about, having a good time with what you're doing. And you can enjoy what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not the full focus. The focus should be on helping people when they have problems and questions, which is a different slant than when you investigate a historical place. But when it comes to personal things like that, and she was very disturbed by this, I said, "Well, let's do a little thing where we can like, guide your mother on to where she needs to go if she's still here for some reason, something's still holding her back. So we did that little thing, and I heard back several weeks later um, that she said that the house felt completely clear after that. She said she didn't feel her mother there. She felt like her mother was finally at peace, which that's a good thing, you know.
Absolutely. Yes. It sounds like that was a good way to approach that for sure. Well, what else can you tell me?
Well, I have been involved in demonology, and I have to stress the point that I'm not talking about medieval demonology, which is where you call up demons, supposedly. I like the modern day demonology, which is how these things, these so-called demons, evil spirits, whatever name you want to give them, interact and maybe can affect people in the way they do. I have actually seen the demonic face to face. They are real. They exist. They're just as real as we are, although they are on a spiritual plane and not a physical plane. Although sometimes, in certain instances, they can cross over into our physical plane and badly affect us in many ways. We've all heard about, of course, and we're familiar with supposed demonic possession. But there are many steps that lead to this, and I think possession, absolutely full blown demonic possession, is kind of rare, and not real rare, but it's not as prevalent as Hollywood again would have you believe. Um, just like the ghost hunting and all that stuff, you don't run into a ghost wherever you go. That's just impossible. It's not going to happen. But these forces, which can be very negative, and that's what you got to remember about this. And I have counseled people all over the world with these demonic problems. These forces are very negative, and you've got to combat them with the positive things in this world, the possible ways to go about warding this negativity off. It's the best thing to do it to keep, and you don't want to invite this negativity into your life by certain lifestyles or certain bad things that you do that are destructive to you. These forces are waiting for you to do that. They are opportunists. You don't open the door to them because if you do, they will definitely take that chance to do what they want to do. And I have seen many people. I'll say this, and I'll make this statement. It's very bold, but I'm trying not to be too dramatic. But I have seen people put 6 foot under there by these forces. Okay, they have been destroyed by these things. Families have been destroyed. Lives have been messed up and made living hell by some of these forces. I have gone into places that have demonic infestations. To a certain degree, there were some very, very bad situations that people get into, and a lot of times they foolishly, like I said, invite these things into their lives. I've even had some very interesting cases with so called haunted objects that may have had a demonic influence about them.
Well, that's interesting. And that may be some of the things that people can sense about an object. It does possess energies from people who've used them in the past. And do you think these demonic forces take possession of the object?
Yes, well, the interesting thing about that, and I'll say this, I had a case right quick where I had a lady call me, said some paranormal activity, and that's usually one of the first signs of demonic activity is really what we just call paranormal activity. They'll start messing with you and start moving things around, hiding stuff from you, doing little tricks like that. But they're doing this basically to get your attention. And I'll go back to that in just a minute. But anyway, I had this lady call me. She had some weird stuff going on. And I said, well, how long have you lived in this house? The usual interview. I do a very thorough interview with people to find out exactly as much information and knowledge on what's happening as I possibly can. And she said, "No, I never had a problem. I've lived here for 30 years. Nothing's ever, the house was built. There's nobody ever even died in this house, you know." And I said, "Well, that's very interesting." I said, "Have you brought anything new into your house lately? Something that maybe an antique or something. She said, no. Well, there was one thing. A few weeks ago, I bought a love seat at a yard sale. I said, well, that's very interesting. I said, did things start happening after you bought this love seat? She said, well, I didn't think about that, but yes, that's about the same time this stuff started happening. I said, well, go back to where you bought that love seat and find out the history on it. Well, she called me back about a week or so later and she said, Mr. Carroll, you won't believe this, but I found out about that love seat. She said, a man committed suicide on that love seat. I said, oh, well, that tells me that maybe you need to go shopping for another love seat and get rid of that one. And I think that'll solve your problem, which she did, and it did solve her problem. But when it comes to these things, this negativity that these things put out, they breathe, they live off of that, they feed off of this negativity. And I tell people a lot of times that's the key to this. Don't feed them. We have an old saying in law enforcement. It's bad enough for someone to shoot at you. It's even worse if you gave them the bullets. Um, and that's very true about these negative forces. Don't give them any food. Don't give them the negativity that they want. They'll keep coming back for it, just like children after candy.